This is Chapter 5, Part B, on the integumentary system. So in the last section, we focused on the skin. This section will look at the remaining structures of the integumentary system, including the hair and the nails and the glands. So hair, just like the skin, is composed of these dead keratinized cells. It's located virtually everywhere on the body except for the palms of the hands, soles of the feet, the lips, nipples, and some portions of external genitalia. Functions of hair include warning of insects on the skin. So this is how we're able to feel just a tiny ant or if a mosquito lands on our arm, right, due to those body hairs. Hair on the head helps guard against physical trauma and protect from heat loss, as well as shield the skin from sunlight and UV radiation. Hairs are sometimes referred to as pili. So they're just flexible strands of those dead keratinized cells, similar to the skin and the epidermis. Hair is produced from the hair follicles embedded in the dermis. Hair contains very hard keratin, which is much harder and durable than the keratin in the skin. And unlike the epidermal cells, hair cells do not flake off. So like the hair on your head can grow almost indefinitely. Right? So our hair does not cut itself. So different regions of the hair include the shaft, which is just the area above the scalp where we can see where keratinization is complete. The root is within the scalp, so this is where the process of keratinization is still going on. The root is what's also going to help anchor the cell in the dermis. Three parts of hair shaft include the medulla, which is just the central core of large cells and some air spaces. The cortex are several layers of these flattened keratinized cells surrounding the medulla. And then the cuticle is the outer layer. So we have many, many layers of these overlapping single cells. And again, these are all dead cells. So this is why it's not painful when you get a haircut. Hair pigment, just like skin pigments, are made by those melanocytes. So with hair, we have melanocytes in the hair follicles. Combinations and concentrations of different melanins create all the range of hair color that we see. However, true red hair, has an additional pigment called pheomelanin. Gray or white hair results when melanin production stops or slows down. So as we age, our melanocytes become less and less active. The hair follicle is going to extend from the surface of the epidermis all the way into the deep dermis below. The hair bulb is the expanded end, the very base of the hair follicle. The hair follicle receptor, or the root hair plexus, is our sensory nerve endings that wrap around that hair follicle bulb. So hair itself is considered to be a sensory touch receptor. So again, this is how we can feel when an insect lands on our skin. The hair matrix is similar to the stratum basale of the epidermis. So this is where new hair cells will be formed. So this is the actively dividing, actively mitotic area of the hair bulb. So again, similar to the epidermis, as new cells are produced from this hair matrix, the older cells will be pushed further and further away. Arrector pili is a small band of smooth muscle that attaches to each hair follicle. So when these muscles contract, it pulls the hair shaft upright and causes what we know as goosebumps. This is really kind of like a vestigial or kind of leftover evolutionary structure. We don't really have much use for the arrector pili muscles anymore, but other mammals still do use them. So when a dog or a cat is feeling threatened or scared, right, and the hair will stand up on the back of their neck, their scruff, to try to make themselves look bigger. It can also help with insulation. So back when our ancestors had more body hair or fur, right, we could use the arrector pili to bring the hair follicles upright and kind of increase their insulation capacity. The hair papilla is the dermal supply of capillaries that's going to nourish these growing and developing hair cells. There are two main types of hair that we see. Vellus hair is the thin, pale, fine body hair in children and adult females. Terminal hair is more coarse and longer, found on the scalp and eyebrows, as well as axillary or armpit regions, pubic regions, and the face and neck of males. So nutrition and hormones can play a role with hair growth. So when I was pregnant, my hair grew really thick and luxurious and really quickly. And then after I gave birth, it pretty much all fell out. So these hair follicles have their own kind of lifespan or cycles. So they have active and regressive phases. So they have periods of growth and periods of rest. Alopecia is a term for any hair thinning that occurs in either sex after age 40. So males and females can both experience hair thinning after a certain age. However, true baldness or frank baldness is what we know as male pattern baldness. So this is genetically determined and a sex-influenced condition. So this is only found in males because it's due to the hair follicle response to a type of testosterone. So the Norwood scale just shows kind of the normal progression of this male pattern baldness. Nails are scale-like modifications of the epidermis that contain a very hard keratin, so even harder than the keratin found in our hair. They're going to function as protective covers for the distal dorsal surfaces of the fingers and toes. So the tips of our fingers and toes, which encounter a lot of abrasion, right? We're always grabbing or maybe clawing things. So we have these protective covers to help protect the sensitive epidermis tissue below. Main parts of the nail include the free edge, so this would be the part of your nail that you have to clip. The nail plate is kind of the body, or the main portion of the nail that you would paint when you paint your fingernails. And the nail root, which is kind of the anchor of the nail itself to the matrix. The nail bed consists of epidermis tissue beneath that keratinized nail plate. So it's still kind of soft tissue below that hardened protective nail plate. The nail matrix is a thickened portion of the nail bed that's responsible for nail growth. So just like we saw with the hair, new hair cells are formed from that matrix at kind of the bottom of the hair follicle. New nail cells are formed from the nail matrix, kind of at the base of the nail. Nail folds are skin folds that overlap the border and the edges of the nail. The eponychium is the fold that projects onto the surface of the body, also called the cuticle. So again, just kind of an extra layer of protection and attachment of that nail plate. The hyponychium is the area under the nail plate where dirt can accumulate. So again, hypo just means below. So this is below the nail edge. Normally, nails will have a healthy pink color because of all of the underlying capillaries in this epidermal region. The lunule is a thickened portion of the nail matrix that it will appear white on some nails. So it looks kind of like that half moon shape. So lunule is a reference to lunar or moon. So just like with skin color, abnormal color or shape of nails can be an indicator of disease. Sweat glands are also sometimes called sudoriferous glands. So sweat glands are found in all skin surfaces except some select locations like the nipples and external genitalia. The two main types of sweat glands include your eccrine sweat glands, which are just kind of your stereotypical sweat glands for thermoregulation, and apocrine sweat glands, which are a little bit different and are going to be responsible for what we know as body odor. So eccrine glands being the most numerous type, so just your normal stereotypical sweat gland for thermoregulation. So they're most abundant on the palms, the soles, and the foreheads. When you get hot and sweaty, one of the first places you accumulate sweat would be on your hands or your head. So these glands have ducts that connect directly to the pores on the surface of the skin. So their secretion is sweat, which is 99% water, some salts, maybe a few antibodies, and some antimicrobial proteins. The apocrine sweat glands are confined to the axillary or armpit and the anogenital regions. So their secretion is a bit different than our standard sweat in that it has a bit more fatty substances and proteins in it. The bacteria on your skin like to eat these proteins and fatty substances found in this apocrine sweat. So this is why we have to wear deodorant. So the sweat itself does not have an odor. It's not until the bacteria on the skin break down the fatty substances and proteins in the sweat and then poop it out, essentially, that causes that body odor. So you can see they're larger than your standard eccrine sweat glands, and they empty directly into the hair follicle. So they don't have their own duct. They don't secrete into a sweat pore. They secrete into the hair follicles. So this is another reason they generally begin functioning at puberty. So once we start to grow hair in the axillary and anogenital areas, we will also start to produce this apocrine sweat. So its function is not confirmed or proved, but it's theorized that they may be another one of those kind of evolutionary traits from our ancestors that we don't really use anymore and function as a sexual scent gland. So maybe way back in the day, our ancestors thought that body odor was attractive. The modified forms of these apocrine glands include ceruminous glands in the ear that produce earwax, and mammary glands in the breast that produce milk. Sebaceous or oil glands are widely distributed except for those few select areas like the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. So similar to those apocrine sweat glands, these sebaceous oil glands are also going to secrete directly into the hair follicle. So this helps to soften the hair and the skin, as well as produce some bactericidal or antimicrobial proteins to help prevent any bacteria from kind of traveling down into the hair follicle and getting into the body. So also similar to your apocrine sweat glands, these are relatively inactive until puberty. They're going to be primarily stimulated by hormones, especially male hormones and androgens. So this is why teenagers are more prone to acne breakouts. All right, so just a summary of the different types of glands we find in the skin. So your eccrine sweat glands are just your run-of-the-mill, everyday sweat gland to help cool you off. They're going to secrete directly to the surface of the skin through a sweat pore. Apocrine sweat glands are relatively inactive until puberty, and they're going to function in theory as a sexual scent gland. So they're going to secrete kind of that fatty protein, sweaty substance into the hair follicles. So this would be the cause of body odor. So when bacteria eat those proteins and fats in the sweat, they produce that odor with their waste products. Sebaceous glands are your oil glands that are going to help lubricate the skin and the hair, as well as prevent water loss. And they have some antibacterial properties as well. So looking at some functions of the skin, skin is first and foremost a barrier. So it's going to separate the inside from the outside. It's going to protect your internal body structures from the external environment. So the main functions of skin include protection, body temperature regulation, cutaneous sensation, so sense of touch, metabolic functions like vitamin D production, a blood reservoir, so we can store some excess blood and fluids in our skin, as well as excretion of waste. So sweat does excrete some waste products as well. So the skin is constantly exposed to the environment, right? That stratum corneum layer on the surface is constantly exposed to microbes, abrasions, different temperature extremes, or harmful chemicals. So we said the first and foremost function of the skin is that barrier. So there's actually 3 types of barriers that we can get from the skin. We have a chemical barrier, which helps protect against things like UV, a physical barrier that can protect against abrasion and injury, and a biological barrier to help protect against infections and pathogens. So the skin is pretty good at keeping us protected as long as it's unbroken. So if there are any breaks in the skin or the skin has been disrupted, then these pathogens may be able to find a way into the body. So the chemical barrier of the skin is the antimicrobial proteins that are secreted in the sweat. Also the sebum or the oil produced by the sebaceous glands. So these just help prevent the bacteria or any pathogens from kind of settling and colonizing on the surface of your skin. We also have what's called the acid mantle that's going to help prevent bacterial invasion of the skin surface. So basically, the secretions of the sweat and the sebum make the skin surface very acidic. So the bacteria don't like to live in that type of pH environment, so they won't want to colonize our skin surface. Also, melanin, the pigment in the skin, is going to provide a chemical barrier against that UV radiation. We said the physical barrier was just the thickness and durability of that stratum corneum and the keratinized cell. So these flat, dead keratinized cells are going to block most water and water-soluble substances. It's also going to help protect against abrasions. There are some chemicals that do have limited penetration of the skin, so lipid-soluble substances, some plant chemicals like poison ivy, organic solvents. Some drugs can be administered through the skin as well. But usually, as long as the skin is unbroken, it's a pretty good physical barrier. So with biological barriers, we said we had the dendritic or the Langerhans cells within the epidermis, which are essentially macrophages or eating cells. So if they encounter any foreign invaders, they will engulf and eat them and potentially activate the immune system response. Another function of the skin was cutaneous sensation. So all of our touch receptors are found within the skin and the dermis. So again, one reason why all the hair follicles and the touch receptors are in the dermis and not the epidermis. Remember, the epidermis is constantly replaced. So we're constantly growing new cells and old cells are being pushed up and out. So if our hair follicle was embedded here, as new cells grew, it would be pushed closer and closer to the surface until it fell out. So there are a few different types of these cutaneous receptors in the skin. So your exteroreceptors are going to respond to any stimuli outside the body. So we have temperature receptors, we have touch receptors, we have pressure receptors, and we have pain receptors. So we'll get into looking at all the different types of sensory receptors when we get to the nervous system chapter. Some metabolic functions of the skin include vitamin D synthesis. So vitamin D is important for calcium absorption in the intestine. So this is why when you go to the grocery store and you buy the whole milk, the vitamin D milk, it's fortified with that vitamin D to help you get maximum absorption of the calcium from the milk. So the way the skin helps to synthesize vitamin D is with UV exposure. It's going to stimulate and react with an enzyme. So this enzyme is going to then start the chemical process to create vitamin D. Skin can also act as a blood reservoir. Skin can hold up to 5% of the body's total blood volume. So all of the blood vessels in the dermis are able to constrict or dilate to kind of control blood flow to different tissues. For instance, during exercise, the blood vessels in the skin may constrict, so we prioritize that blood circulation to the exercising muscle that currently has a higher oxygen demand. We can also dilate the blood vessels in the dermis to assist with heat loss. Skin also functions in excretion of waste products, so it can secrete limited amounts of some of those nitrogenous wastes like ammonia, urea, and uric acid, the same waste that we find in urine. It can also cause sweat and water loss, so that's why if you sweat a lot, it's good to drink something like Gatorade to restore these electrolytes and these salts. The primary cause of skin cancer is overexposure to UV radiation. Most skin cancers are benign and do not spread or metastasize. So looking at how sunlight can cause skin cancer, it essentially breaks down your DNA. So that double helix model, the instructions on how to make one of you. So the UV, the energy, the ultraviolet energy, radiation energy is going to physically break apart these chemical bonds in the DNA and can lead to mutations. So if the mutation is not caught and corrected, then that abnormal protein or abnormal cell will be allowed to grow and divide, producing a tumor or a cancerous growth. We do have some built-in protective measures against this UV damage. We have certain enzymes in our skin that look for these UV mutations and try to correct them, but occasionally mistakes slip through the cracks. There's three major types of skin cancer. We'll look at basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and melanoma. Basal cell carcinoma is the least malignant and the most common. So if you're going to get a skin cancer, this would be the one you would want to get. Basal cell carcinoma, the stratum basal, or the basal cells, are going to be abnormal. So they'll slowly invade the dermis and the hypodermis and kind of spread throughout the skin. So 99% of cases can be cured by simple surgical removal. Squamous cell carcinoma is the second most common type, and it can metastasize and spread if it's not caught early enough. So this is going to involve some of those flattened squamous cells, keratinocytes, in the stratum spinosum. So squamous cell carcinoma usually presents as kind of scaly red patches on the scalp, the ears, or the hands and face. And again, as long as it's caught early, there's generally a good prognosis. It can be removed surgically or radiation therapy. Melanoma is a cancer of the melanocyte. So this is the most dangerous type of skin cancer because it is highly metastatic and resistant to chemotherapy. So it's generally treated by wide surgical excision accompanied by immunotherapy. So just cut melanoma out itself is generally not going to be enough. We have to do a little bit extra with different types of immunotherapy to keep it from spreading or coming back. So the key to survival of melanoma is early detection and the ABCD rule. So A, for asymmetry. So is the mole symmetrical or is it asymmetrical? So most healthy moles and freckles will be near perfect little circles. Right? They won't have odd shapes to them. B is for the border, so the outline of the mole. Again, normally your healthy freckles and moles would have a smooth margin or a smooth border. In melanoma, it's a more jagged, irregularly shaped outline. C for color. So with melanoma, you may have various shades of color in the mole, whereas your healthy freckles and moles would be one solid shade of brown. And then D for diameter, so the size of the mole. So generally, moles that are larger than 6 millimeters, or say the size of a pencil eraser, could be indicative of a melanoma. Burns are any type of tissue damage caused by heat, electricity, radiation, or certain chemicals. So the damage that occurs with burns is a denaturation of the proteins in the cells, which ultimately destroys the cells themselves. Most immediate threat from burns is dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. We can store a lot of fluid in our skin and our tissues. So this could lead to kidney shock, renal shutdown, and circulatory shock. So when we evaluate burns, generally we use the rule of 9. So we break the body up into 11 sections to kind of calculate what percentage of the body area or surface area each section is. So each section represents 9% of the body surface, except for the genitals. So we use this to estimate how much fluid has been lost. Burns are classified based on the severity or how much of the skin tissue is affected. So in your first degree burns, only the epidermis has been affected. The dermis is still fine. This would have kind of some localized redness, maybe a little bit of swelling and tenderness. So a mild sunburn would be like a first degree burn. Second degree burn is where the damage goes a bit deeper and now the dermis is affected. So with second degree burns, you will have blisters form. First and second degree burns are referred to as partial thickness burns because only part of the epidermis or the dermis are affected. Third degree burns are full thickness burns. So the entire thickness of the skin has been affected. So the epidermis, the dermis, and possibly the subcutaneous level in the hypodermis. So with third degree burns, the skin turns either a grayish white, black, or kind of a charred look. So it's not just a slight redness like a sunburn or a blister burn. So no swelling or edema will be seen because all of the fluid in that tissue has been lost. But something ironic about the third degree burns is they're actually the least painful because all of those nerve endings in the dermis have been destroyed. And if you don't have nerve endings, there's no way for your brain to receive those pain signals. So with third degree burns, skin grafting is usually going to be necessary. So the way skin graft works, they take a piece of healthy skin, maybe from somewhere else on the body. They mesh the skin, so they run it through kind of a greater. So we have this mesh structure. So if we were to just put the solid piece of skin on the wound, it wouldn't heal as quickly or properly. So we have all of these little holes, so new skin growing will fill in all of these little gaps.